Okay, Minister and I are here with Andrew Crisp and Tim Weebush, and we'll go through a few different announcements, and then I'll hand over to Tim and he will take you through that call of the card as he has done for a number of days now, and then we're happy to take any questions. Last night showed that the situation continues to evolve in places like Shepparton, Echuca, Charlton and Kerrang, where flood levels continue to rise, where communities are at real risk. We're doing everything we can to support them. The most important thing off the top, I can again repeat, please follow the advice that's provided to you. Please be aware of the circumstances that you confront. Obviously people are doing an amazing job looking out for each other. There's so many volunteers and other career staff on the ground doing everything they possibly can to support those that are at immediate risk. But now, for some communities, not all, but for some communities, we can move into that recovery and clean-up phase. I've got a number of important announcements today about additional support that I want to make. And then, as I said, we'll go to Tim and he can give you the most contemporary picture of where waters are at, people that are out of their homes, risks and challenges over this next 24-hour period, and indeed a bit of a look back on what occurred last night. In terms of roads, first and foremost, the immediate concern is to repair those roads so that people can start moving around to support emergency services and freight, and to allow people to get back into community and where they need to be. We've already got crews out doing repair work right across the state, and we've bolstered their efforts and our overall efforts by $165 million. I can announce today $165 million in emergency road repair blitz funding has been provided. That'll help us to find and fix those potholes, asphalting and repairing road surfaces that have been damaged by this flood event, and to make those hardest hit roads safe for travel again. The package will also cover larger works like completely rebuilding roads and bridges, particularly in the Western, Hume, Loddon and the Loddon-Mallee regions, which have been worst affected. There will need to be more funding beyond that. This is an initial amount of money, and it'll underpin those emergency repairs. It's important to note that just over the last few days, hundreds of crews have already completed more than 500 individual inspections of larger damaged sites. They've found and fixed, this is quite an amazing effort, some 10,000 potholes caused by the rain event, and they've attended more than 20 landslips right across the state. This funding, this $165 million in additional funding, is urgent. It's there now. Those teams are doing that work, and they'll continue to make those emergency repairs so we can get more and more roads open, more and more people, whether they be freight, fodder, emergency services or local residents, back to where they need to be. Obviously this event is still unfolding, and there is obviously the direct response to those unfolding events, but we can in some parts of the state move to a clean-up phase. That's why I'm also pleased to be able to announce $150 million in additional funding for a coordinated clean-up effort in those areas that are hardest hit, and particularly where waters are falling, and we can follow that water and support each and every one of those communities, noting that that won't be everybody right now because some waters have not reached their peak in some communities. In terms of the lead contractor for those arrangements, Johns Ling, who have experience in fire clean-up and flood and storm clean-up both here and in New South Wales, have been appointed as the lead contractor. They'll be out there to deal with hazards and debris that's been moved throughout roads and streets and local properties, and they'll also work to collect rubbish that is now, and other items that have been taken out of properties and put onto nature strips. They're expert at this, they know what they're doing, they'll be there, and people who want to register for that clean-up service can call 1-800 560 760, and then that means they're part of that clean-up effort, and That's a lead contract arrangement. There'll be other subcontractors who work with them. They know what they're doing. They can do it safely. It will take some time, but registering is an important first step to get that done. We've also spoken about immediate financial assistance to support Victorians who've been forced to evacuate with the basics like shelter, food, clothing, medicine, things of that nature. But as we move into that recovery phase, then there is more that needs to be done. We'll also invest and announce today some $21 million package of critical casework support. So this is about helping families with things like housing, health, wellbeing, financial and legal counselling, assessing grants and advice for business owners whose livelihoods have of course been affected by this event. We're also putting community recovery officers into those flood affected communities to help people with whatever they need. Can be quite challenging to navigate your way through all the different programs of support and assistance. Those community recovery officers will help people navigate through all of their issues and their needs and connect them to the best service response, grants, other assistance that is there for them. Finally, we're supporting Victorians whose homes have been profoundly damaged but who aren't insured with Emergency Re-establishment Assistance Fund grants. The fund provides up to $42,250 for uninsured properties. That helps to pay for clean-up, repairs, rebuilding and replacement of some essential household contents that have been lost. All of these payments that we've been talking about in recent days can be accessed at the following website: emergencypayments.dffh.vic.gov.au, and for those without access to the internet, you can call 1800 226 226. Now, we continue to work closely with the federal government, and we're very grateful for their partnership in providing support and assistance to so many who have been impacted. I just want to remind people that, as the Prime Minister touched on yesterday, the Commonwealth has both its disaster recovery allowance and disaster recovery payments as well for Victorians in affected local government areas. There's an initial group of councils that have been nominated. That will be added to today, tomorrow. That will continue to grow. Any information that anyone might need from that, in relation to that, the my.gov.au is the place to go to receive all the information that you might need there. In terms of flood updates, Tim will take us through that in more detail. We've got 13 relief centres that are open, providing food and shelter and comfort to people who are displaced from their homes. We've got 11 aircraft up in the air today, making damage assessments as well as doing that important rescue work. We have literally thousands of volunteers and career staff from our broader emergency services family, and they're all doing an amazing job. They're the best of us, and we're so grateful for the work that they're doing. And then, of course, there are many others without a uniform who are just pitching in, helping neighbours, friends and family. That sense of connection, that sense of regional communities sticking together, it's something that they should be proud of, and we're certainly very proud of them at this, the most difficult of times. Just a couple of other headline numbers on roads. We've still got 359 roads closed today. That number changes hourly, and we'll try and keep you across that as best we can. There are around 1,860 properties around the Marubna area that are still without power, and teams are working as hard as they can to re-energise that substation and get the power back on to Marubna families and businesses. On emergency payments, those immediate emergency payments of around $2,000 per family that I've been speaking about for these last few days, we've now received 11,061 important applications to date. I think around 3,000 of those have already been paid out. We've got extra teams, call centres from across government working to do that. We'll get those paid out as quickly as we possibly can. But in some respects, that number serves as a proxy, because we're still doing assessments about flood damage in individual properties, but the fact that more than 11,000 people have applied That gives you a sense of exactly how many people are out of their home, whether it be because they would have been isolated if they stayed, or have been flooded out, or have followed advice from emergency services to evacuate for their safety, as well as for the safety of emergency services who might then have to come to their aid. This is a very, very significant event affecting many, many tens of thousands of people. Now, in coming days, we're expecting some more rain, likely towards the back end of this week, particularly in the northeast of the state. The Bureau will be back throughout the week to keep you updated on that. I just want to raise a couple of other issues before we go to Tim. There are 71 schools and 100 early learning centres that are closed. Those schools have all made contact with relevant families, but of course we're here to support students right across the board, particularly senior students who are coming into exam season. Language exams continue. English is next week. I'll have more to say tomorrow about how we're going to support our Year 12s, and we're just finalising that now, but we do know that this will be a challenging time. We want to get as much certainty to those families and those students as we can, as quickly as possible. That's likely for tomorrow. Again, can I thank each and every one of those volunteers and career staff out there doing such an amazing job supporting people in a very challenging time. We're deeply grateful to all of you. We say thank you, and the best way for all of us to truly express our gratitude to those who are putting themselves in harm's way to keep others safe is to follow the advice that they give you. If you're asked to leave, please do so. And of course, again, we can't say this enough, please, please do not drive into floodwater. Not only is there's obvious danger from that, and then there are other dangers that you won't know about until it's too late. The road underneath may not be there. There may be all manner of really dangerous circumstances that you are driving into. It might seem like you can get to the other side, but there have literally been hundreds and hundreds of examples where emergency services crews have had to go and rescue people, putting them in danger because it was not as it seemed, and vehicles could not get where they were intending to go. So this is a very substantial package in relation to road funding, case management and tailored individual support, helping people navigate their way through all the different grants, all the different support, and of course clean up that $150 million plus that will appoint the lead contractor. They're already out there working. We'll keep you up to date as the rest of the week unfolds. But please register on the number that I went to earlier. All those payments are available, and we're doing everything we can to process them as fast as possible, and we'll be indebted to all of you guys if you can help us get those websites and 1-800 numbers out there as broadly as possible. Victorians are always best when we stick together, and that's exactly what we're seeing in regional communities right across the board. Thank you to everybody who's pitching in. Thank you to everybody who's following advice and listening to warnings and acting on the best of advice. That's where the best decisions come from the best information and sticking together. That's how we'll get through this event, which is far from over. A number of communities are in really difficult circumstances over these next few days, and of course more rain later on this week. Perhaps the best thing to do now is to ask Tim Weebush from Vic SES to take us through where things are at across the state, and then I think Commissioner Crisp has got some background he can give you in relation to our very strong partnership with the Australian Defence Force, and then we're happy to take any questions you have.
Thanks, Premier, and good morning, everybody. As the Premier's just indicated, whilst we have a number of communities where rivers are starting to recede, there are still many rivers and communities that are under threat of major flooding in these coming days. Starting in the west of the state, the Wimmera River is expected to peak at 3.6 metres tomorrow, being Tuesday. The good news in and around Horsham is that whilst we won't see any residential inundation, we will see some streets and roadways that will have water through them, and we'll also see the showgrounds, football fields and things like that around Horsham that will be impacted by that flooding. At Charlton, similarly, good news, the rivers have now peaked on the Avoca at Charlton. It peaked at 7.9 metres, just below the forecast peak of 8 metres, and that puts it in the same level of 2010 rather than the record peak that we saw in 2011 of 8.6 metres. And at this stage, we're not seeing significant numbers of properties being inundated there. The floodwaters on the Loddon River now start to affect all of the communities upstream of Serpentine as the waters move towards the Murray River. And in particular, we're going to see Kerrang coming under pressure Tuesday night into Wednesday, where it will start to reach the major flood level, and expecting at this stage for that major flood level to peak Wednesday into Thursday. The challenge for Kerrang is that it will be isolated, potentially for up to 7 days. So there was a community meeting held there yesterday. The community is now readying themselves. The roads will be sandbagged to join up the levees around Kerrang. And at this stage, at the height that we're expecting of 78 metres, we do expect Kerrang to be able to remain dry, but it will be isolated. And so we're asking the Kerrang community to consider whether they should now be moving to another location, given that peak expected Wednesday into Thursday. At Rochester, we're slowly starting to see the Campaspe River recede. It has now reached the moderate flood level, but even at the moderate flood level, there is still significant inundation of the township. It's still too early for our impact assessment teams to be able to get in there and do a detailed assessment of the impacts, but as we've seen through aerial footage and our assessments, around 85% of the township, we believe, has had inundation of properties in that space. Moving to Echuca, we've seen the peak late yesterday afternoon at Echuca at 96.25 metres. It is slowly receding on the Campaspe River. It's now back around 96 metres at that location, but it's still going to be at that major flood level for another 24 to 48 hours. That means there's still around 1,200 properties that are either isolated or some levels of inundation either on the property and a number of homes above floor. Again, impact assessment will occur once that major flood peak has gone through, noting that the second flood peak is coming from the Murray River. And the Murray River is expected to peak at 95 metres AHD, which means we're going to see around 1,000 to 2,000 properties in Echuca come under pressure from Tuesday onwards in that area. Moving up to Shepparton, if there's some light at the end of the tunnel, what we were forecasting, which was 12.2 metres and potentially 7,300 homes being potentially impacted in one form or another. The good news on the Goulburn River at Shepparton is that it peaked this morning at 12.05 metres. That 15 centimetres makes a significant difference to the number of properties either isolated or impacted. We believe around 4,000 properties there are now either isolated or have some levels of inundation. Again, impact assessment will occur over the next weekend. And that's because the Goulburn River will still be at the major flood level for another 4 to 5 days. The causeway in particular between Mooroopna and Shepparton will only see the water drop below the causeway, we believe, Thursday into Friday. And then that will need to be assessed before it can be reopened. But it will be some time yet before we see the major flood level, which is around 11 metres, being below that level in and around Shepparton, Kyalla and also Mooroopna. At Orvale, which is just on the outskirts of Shepparton on the Broken River, that also has now peaked at 8.35 metres. And is likely to continue to remain at that major flood level for the next 2 days. At Seymour, the Goulburn River is continuing to recede despite the releases that are coming out of Lake Eildon, and we're now seeing a level at the moderate flood level of 6.5 metres, and that will continue to recede. Over in the southwest of the state, the Hopkins River at Allensford is expected to peak there in the next 24 hours. We're only talking about a handful of houses that are likely to be impacted there, but the most significant impact is to the Princes Highway, which is cut between Camperdown and Allensford, and so we're advising people that might be travelling in that area to make sure that you're checking Vic traffic in terms of your travel plans. We continue to see a significant number of rescues occurring. We've now seen over 650 flood rescues have to occur during this event. We've had another 100 or so overnight in and around the Shepparton Goulburn Valley district. Some of those are still being responded to this morning with the sheer volume of calls. Our emergency services, both SES, Fire Rescue Victoria, Police, Shepparton Search and Rescue Squad, are all doing an amazing effort there. We're also going to see additional support today from a range of other government authorities such as Fisheries and Department of Transport through their Transport Safety Marine Division, providing additional boats into that area. Finally, I just want to conclude with a big shout out to our SES volunteers right across the state. I'm particularly proud of what they've been able to achieve over this last week. Over 6,000 requests for assistance is what they've been responding to. They haven't done it alone. They've been supported by our volunteers from CFA, from Lifesaving Victoria, from the Rapid Relief Team, not to mention our career teams from Forest Fire Management Victoria, from Fire Rescue Victoria, Police, Ambulance, Local Council and a range of other community groups. If I can say a very sincere thank you to our volunteers, but particularly to their employers. We're moving into the working week now. We can't thank our employers of our volunteers enough for releasing them to be available to respond to this flood emergency, and we look forward to that continued support from those employers. I'll now pass over to Andrew Crisp for final comments.
Excuse me. Thanks very much, Tim, and good morning, everyone. Yet again, the Australian Defence Force has come in to support and work with our emergency services to look after the Victorian community. There was a request for assistance went in a couple of days ago for 60 ADF, but we've got in excess of 100 ADF working on the ground, mainly in the north of the state. They've been undertaking a range of tasks, and that's included filling sandbags, moving sandbags, door knocking when we're asking people to evacuate from certain locations. So whether that's been Bendigo or Echuca, and a significant effort in Shepparton, we sincerely thank the Australian Defence Force for what they're doing. They've also committing a number of planners and logisticians. So at the moment we've got 2 of those planners and logisticians supporting the clean-up activity and another 2 working on our relief planning. We've submitted an additional request for ADF support, and that's around aviation. We do have 11 aircraft flying at the moment, undertaking a wide variety of roles, but given the circumstances confronting us at the moment and what we're looking at over the next few weeks, we've made this request, and we will have additional ADF aviation support in the state from tomorrow. So again, I really sincerely thank the ADF for everything they do in support of our communities. It's not just the technical skills that they bring to the task, it's that community confidence when people see the uniform. We will continue our discussions with the ADF and look at other requests as we become more aware of the impacts from this flood event. I'd suggest it's probably not the last time that we'll be standing up and talking about the Australian Defence Force. During emergencies such as this, we see the absolute best in behaviour across all of our Victorians. Sadly, we also see the absolute worst in behaviour. And I've seen this in a number of emergencies over many, many years. Victoria Police at the moment are investigating a burglary of premises in the Maribyrnong area. Situation being where someone left, acting on advice to leave during the flood event, and their home has subsequently been burgled. There is information on the police website, but I know they are looking for information in relation to a Blue Fort territory that was seen in that area. If you can support police, then please do so. If you've got information, Crime Stoppers on 1800 000 000 333 000 1800 333 000. Victoria Police are doing an absolutely amazing job, whether it's in the air, traffic management points, swiftwater rescue, and they are so committed to keeping our community safe. So that's patrolling areas that have been impacted by flood events. So an incredible effort by Victoria Police. All of our emergency services have been working so strongly together, and it's been such a strong partnership, and this is the way that we will get through this, whether it is our career, whether it is our volunteers. But there's one particular organisation that doesn't usually get a mention or seen in these types of situations. That's Lifesaving Victoria. Again, they do incredible work. We see them a lot during the summer. But in this particular event, they've used their rescue helicopters. So working in cooperation with Ambulance Victoria and the police, involved in a number of taskings with rescues. They've got a drone capability, so when we want to understand the impacts from this particular event, they've been working in metropolitan Melbourne and also down in Geelong. And their boat crews have been up in Rochester and moving into the Shepparton area to work side by side with the SES. So an incredible effort by our Lifesaving Victoria. Thanks. I'm happy to take questions now.
Premier, what's your message? I guess what's your response to that that house being looted in Maribyrnong, and are you aware of any other houses being looted?
I'm not aware of any other reports of that sort of activity. I think Commissioner Crispus put it well. During these very difficult times, we see the best of the Victorian spirit, people looking out for each other, people doing quite extraordinary things, and then we see some other behaviour that is really, really poor. So Victoria Police, when Assistant Commissioner stood up with us the other day, made it very clear there'd be a zero tolerance approach from Victoria Police to any of that sort of behaviour, and that hasn't changed. So anybody who can assist police with their inquiries, I'd urge you to do just that. Let's not have the actions of a very small number of people detract in any way from thousands and thousands of people who are doing the best of work because they're the best of us, putting themselves in harm's way to keep other people safe.
Prime Minister yesterday announced a funding package. It was limited to certain LGAs. Is that being reviewed? There are people in the that say they really can't get it.
So there is so obviously the grants of up to $2,000 per family, as well as access to those case managers, people who can navigate and deal with all of a family's needs, all of an individual's needs, together with the clean-up and road announcements I've made today. They apply across all affected areas. In terms of the income support payments that the Prime Minister spoke to yesterday, the ones you can get through MyGov, we provide information based on assessments, and they will gradually and steadily add additional local government areas to that. So I would expect that before the end of today, there'll be additional local government areas, and then tomorrow and the day after, as those assessments are done. So it's very much different phases. So it's about when the emergency's on, people are out of their house, we give you grants because you need shelter, you need food, you need clothing, you need medicine. Then we move to clean up, income support, the list goes on and on, roads, all of those things. Today's announcements are very important, but there'll be more. So for instance, I'm going to come back on students, particularly senior students tomorrow. I'll also come back tomorrow in relation to animal welfare, ag, farmers, and some of our efforts there. And indeed there'll be many more things beyond that too.
Just on the road repair blitz, those workers are obviously going to have to come from somewhere. Do you foresee that delaying road projects around the state?
No, I don't think so. What I'd say to you is we're very deeply grateful to a number of our big build contractors who have stepped up. So, for instance, Fulton, Hogan, Downer, others who are stepping in to provide additional crews to help us with that work. But just the sheer amount of work that's been done over these last 4 or 5 days, it's a credit to those crews. They're out and about, they're doing that work. This additional $160 million is about making sure that those urgent repairs that are directly related to floods and getting roads back open to connect communities, to get emergency services in, other support services as well, and indeed freight movements, all of that's critically important, and they are working 24/7 and doing a fantastic job. So I want to thank each of them. They literally are working around the clock, and they've made really significant progress. They're chasing these floodwaters as they come down, making repairs. We may have to go back and redo some of that work, but the most important thing is to have communities as accessible as possible, because that's directly linked to keeping people safe.
These repairs in some cases are extremely urgent, but there is also more rain possibly on the horizon. Are you having to be strategic about where you make repairs so that you don't have to do it again in a month or so?
I think that part of the rapid, urgent, if you like, emergency repair work is a full acknowledgement that we may have to go back and do some of this work again, but it's a trade-off between what we can do get done now and roads that need to be open for the purposes of safety, providing relief, providing support, freight, all of those things. So there's a bit of a balancing act there, but our teams are out there working, as I said, around the clock. When I got the report this morning of 10,000 potholes having been filled, I questioned whether that number was right. It's an amazing effort. They are literally around the clock, and I want to thank each and every one of them. And yes, because of future floodwaters and indeed some of the emergency nature, they're kind of temporary repairs, some of these. They'll have to come back and do a more substantive job, and they will. This $160 million is, of course, on top of the almost $800 million we provided in the budget back in May for road maintenance. We've not had favourable conditions to do those more lasting repairs, but this emergency work, these running repairs, if you like, they're absolutely critical, and the teams are working 24/7 to get them done.
So just to be clear, the 160, because last week you mentioned that some of it might be shifted around from existing. This is brand new.
This is new over and above what we had in the budget.
Do you expect this to have an impact on the budget bottom line?
This flood event will absolutely require many hundreds of millions of dollars of support, and on behalf of our government, we will be there to support every family, every single community who's been touched by this. We have a very strong partnership with the Commonwealth government. I'm not here to make announcements on behalf of that government, but we work very closely together. And it was great to have the Prime Minister here so fast, to be on the ground, listening to locals, asking that question that I ask whenever I go to these incident control centres and move around the community. Have you got everything you need? And it's very reassuring to have the leader of our nation asking that same question. So we've got a strong partnership. This will be many hundreds of millions of dollars. That's why we have disaster arrangements in place. That's why we work together. And I'll give a shout out to local government as well. The $500,000 payments to those 24 councils yesterday have been very well received. And that won't be the end of it. There'll be more support, and we'll make further announcements in coming days.
The PM spoke this morning about the obvious inflationary effects it's likely to have. Have you got any advice, or maybe not formal advice, but can you commentate on whether there might be a particular inflationary effect in Victoria, given it's happening here? Are we likely to see fruit and veg prices go up?
Look, I don't have any detailed advice. Obviously, assessments are still being made, and I just want to make this point. There are a number of communities where people have gone back in. There's no formal notice that it's safe to return. So I just ask people to just be very, very careful. There's all manner of hazards. There'll be some communities that don't have power. Water's not safe to drink. Sewerage systems have been fundamentally compromised. So those assessments are still being made, and that's really important. They'll get made as fast as possible, but we're not in a position necessarily to really understand all the damage that's been done. But we do know that there are significant risks right now, and going back to your home, and I can understand, absolutely. I can absolutely understand, having grown up in communities that were flood affected. I remember the '93 floods very, very well. There's a real sense to get back in, to clean up, and I get that. But we just all have to be very careful not to be putting ourselves in harm's way. It stands to reason, though, that there'll be big impacts when it comes to the issues you've raised, Paul, because this is the food bowl of our state, the food bowl of our nation, whether it be in terms of fruit and veg, cropping more broadly, dairy, not to beef, sheep, meat. This is a very important part of our state, and a very big part of our state. So there's almost certainly going to be production impacts.
Is there literally anything the government can do to kind of alleviate the inflationary impact?
Look, I think the best thing is to always be straight up with people. There are some things that we can achieve. So, for instance, we can keep on providing grants and assistance to people who are out of their home. We can have those lead contract arrangements I've announced today, so clean-up can be centrally coordinated, and we can work with councils, businesses, individual households. The road funding package we talked about this morning, all of those things we can do, but there are some things that we can have very little impact on. My focus at the moment is supporting every community and every family to get through this as safely as we possibly can, to clean up, to rebuild, to recover. There's going to be many months where these communities will still feel the impacts of this flood event, and there'll be many people who are out of their homes for an extended period because of things like power, sewerage, water, repairs that need to be made to their own property, and indeed some of the other civil infrastructure as well, roads and things of that nature. So this is going to be with us for an extended period, and I'm very focused on the stuff we can do rather than things that are still serious. They're very impactful, but they're not necessarily things that we can
Just
actually
following that
influence.
on Mickle, I'm sorry.
Yes.
How many people called that hotline? Do you have an update?
I'll get an update later on today. I can tell you though that we've got a full staffing complement. So the EOI went out over the weekend. We're very pleased with the take up of that. Again, this won't be for everybody, but it'll be an option that's there that hasn't been there in the past. 250 going to 500. We're making arrangements to support kids and pets and all of those sort of very practical issues. You get fed 3 meals a day. You can get all the wraparound support that you might need also. And I think people will take us up on that. And if I can get you an update of how many have come through, I absolutely will do that. But I haven't received one yet.
In Rochester, I believe that area still may be isolated, but there's a lot of residents in there who say they need routes on the ground now. How quickly can people get to
That's
them?
exactly what we're providing to them, whether it be through ADF, some of the clean-up arrangements I've just spoken to, road repairs, getting access, getting people into some of these communities is very, very challenging. I spoke with Peter Walsh, I rang him yesterday and went through some of those issues with him, and there were some very practical suggestions that were made. We've followed up on those already. My office has been in constant contact with each of the affected MPs, but I thought I'd ring Peter myself yesterday just again to ask, have you got everything you need? He was in Rochester at the time, and I think we've actioned a few of the things that he had provided feedback. So look, every community will have things that they need, and our job is just to methodically work through with a sense of urgency, but it has to be safe as well. We've got to be careful to be sending people in. It's got to be safe to do that. But as soon as we can get in, as soon as we can be there to support every single person who's been touched by this, we will. And that work has already started as we chase those flood waters as they recede. Noting, of course, and I can't overstate this, there is another challenge coming later this week. And I'll let the Bureau do the forecasting, but there are significant predictions of other rainfall events. And given, as I said the other day, we started last Wednesday, ground was sodden, catchments were full, then we've had a massive rain event. So that's our starting point now. We've still got the Murray to peak. We've got a number of communities that haven't peaked yet, and we're going to get more rain off that higher base. So that's going to present really significant challenges.
Is 100 ADF on the ground enough?
I don't think there's any limiting factor. I want to thank the ADF for the work they're doing already. There's a new arrangement in place in relation to local ADF personnel, whether that be in the northeast or indeed over towards Seymour. But again, I think there was more than a few ADF personnel who wanted to come from Puckapunyal to help Seymour but couldn't get there. I think Bandiana have been providing support for the northeast as well. That's a local arrangement. It doesn't go through that request for assistance process that we do more formally. I want to thank every single member of the ADF who's out there working hard, and I'm very confident that part of that strong partnership with the Commonwealth Government will get the ADF support that we need, and they'll do us proud, just as our emergency services do.
Premier, just on the move forward, do you anticipate there to be targeted financial support for farm?
A little bit early to say that, but again, as I said before, we will stand with every sector, every business, every household, every local council who's been impacted by this. I know it's very frustrating that it takes time to make the proper assessments, but you have to do that. And of course, it's very difficult to know exactly how much damage has been done until we see these waters subside. And this is a little bit different to other flood events in that its record, in terms of the magnitude of it, is bigger. But also it's a kind of a rolling flood event as well. We're going to see more and more rainfall, so that presents a unique challenge as well. But as soon as we can make assessments, just as we have done with roads, as I said before, there's been more than 500 detailed inspections. Crews are out on the ground day and night and have been from the moment it was safe to do that. We'll have more and more information. Cabinet committees meeting every single day, lengthy meetings going through the full list. All of our departments and agencies are working as one, and indeed the Commonwealth Government's working very closely with us too.
You mentioned the company Johns Lyng has been appointed to help with the clean-up. Obviously, it's a pretty urgent set of circumstances, and possibly the normal competitive tender arrangements weren't able to happen. But what was the basis for choosing them rather than someone else?
Sure. So we have a panel, and that panel's been stood up. So there's some pre-approval processes, if you like, and I would say that company has got both track record and experience working with storm damage and fire for us, and in a more contemporary sense have worked on the New South Wales floods. So they have the absolute, they are expert in doing this work. They're not the only company. There'll be other companies and there'll be subcontract arrangements as well. And we'll work with local councils and we'll have more to say about different elements of that clean-up package. But the first step is to register. We want to have trucks rolling debris off people's nature strips as fast as we can, out of streets as well. And we will, as I said, we'll chase those floodwaters as they recede to provide, in the first instance, emergency relief, then clean up, and then there'll be a big rebuild process as well. But we'll stand with every one of those communities because that's exactly what we need to do.
Maria, just on the Flemington Race Course wall, yesterday you announced there being an independent review into whether that affected floods in that area.
Correct.
Do you think Melbourne Water is the right agency to be doing that, given everyone's approved that wall in the first place?
Well, I think Melbourne Water can conduct a review. Let's wait and see what that review says. I've got confidence in them and we'll get those reports back and then we can make assessments at that point.
The current chair then was also a member of government at the time that the wall was approved. Is that a concern to you?
Well, these matters were approved back in 2004, as I understand it. I think construction finished in 2007. There were expert hydrology reports, engineering reports. There was a planning process that was gone through. Well, let's have a look at this. Let's get Melbourne Water to review it. I'm confident that they can do that. They can then present their findings and we can make decisions based on that. I don't want to prejudge that review, but if the question is, are they able to do it, I've got confidence that they are.
Has a deadline been set for that review being given to government?
No, it hasn't. But
When do you expect it?
let me come back to you with some estimate of when that might be finished.
Talk about this being the starting base and floods potentially like rolling over and over. What is the plan going forward? Because at the moment you've got so many crews on the ground, we're all in car, people are probably getting exhausted. You've got Tasmania in trouble, New South Wales in floods. Have you thought about staffing support?
Obviously, fatigue management is something that all of our emergency services try and balance, try and manage. But there's a lot of tired people out there. There is. And, I don't think we're necessarily. And again, I don't want to get into the bureau's space here, but I'll put it to you this way: I'm not advised or briefed that there is a rain event like we had late last week occurring again this week. But there is more rain, and almost any additional rainfall is a really significant challenge. So this is not, run and done in a short period of time. It's going to be a rolling issue, and managing fatigue is really important. I know that our emergency services, all of our partners take that extremely seriously. But again, that's why it's so impressive to see so many people. And I was talking to some people who were in the incident control centre yesterday, who are family friends of the Wills family. So to be dealing with that grief, to be dealing with that community impact, and still putting their community ahead of themselves, it's a deeply, deeply impressive thing. And of course, just as with fire, there'll be many people who are out there supporting their neighbours and friends in their local community whose own properties, whose own houses will be absolutely impacted by this. So when we say they are the best of us, we mean it. And we'll do everything we can to support them. There's already many different members of the public service who wouldn't necessarily be involved in an emergency response. They're being moved across to try and give some respite to very fatigued staff. We'll do everything we can, be as creative as we can to try and manage that workload. But again, I don't want to give the impression that there's a rainfall event coming this Thursday equivalent to last Thursday. That's a matter for the Bureau. But any more rain is going to be a challenge for us.
Is the state disaster still being considered, or is that past that?
Those issues are considered every single day. So if and when Andrew believes that the Minister needs to be given quite extraordinary powers in order to get things done and keep people safe, he won't hesitate to provide that advice. He's provided it to me in the past, and I then won't hesitate to sign the relevant paperwork. But at the moment, there's absolutely nothing. There's no need for us to do that. Nothing's being held up, nothing's being delayed, nothing that's needed is contingent on that. But the very moment that changes, if it does, then we won't hesitate.
Just on floodplains, there's obviously a conversation at the moment as inevitably about whether people should be living in certain areas. I know in the past the state government has said that it's more a local council issue. Does the potential increased frequency of events like this and the seriousness of them due to climate change necessitate a review into floodplain mapping and decisions on where people should live in Victoria?
Well, Well, town planning in the main is a matter for local government. And whilst my views on climate change are well known and very well understood, but not just some kind of opinion thing, it's like we're taking action. This is the renewable energy capital of our nation for a reason. But with the greatest of respect, and I know why you asked the question, but I don't think people who are, you know, up to their waist in water need me to be going on about climate change. I'll leave that to others. No, but Paul, as I said, when I said with the greatest respect, I meant it. I'm not here for a quarrel with you or anybody else. I'm not going to be getting into a climate change debate right now while we've got people who are out of their house because the water's literally above the windows and higher. My record on climate change, the action we've taken is very clear. Every flood event, if I can perhaps answer your question this way, every fire, every flood, every emergency we learn from, and policies change and approaches change. That's part of that culture of continuous improvement and learning. And this is a very big event, bigger than we've seen in some parts for a very long time, perhaps in some parts bigger than we've ever seen before. So there are a number of realities, there are a number of challenges that we're facing right now, and they're different than what they were 20, 30, 50 years ago. But I'm not criticising you for asking the question, absolutely, but I'm not going to be getting into a climate change debate at the moment because I just don't think it's fair on people, because not necessarily not everyone would share my view on that. And now's not a time to be doing anything other than uniting people and supporting people regardless of their views on policy. I'm focused exclusively on their safety and their needs as Victorian citizens. That's the most important thing, and there'll be a time to talk about all of those things, and there'll be a process. This event will be thoroughly examined from start to finish. We've got that continuous monitoring IGM process that'll be done in the usual way. Again, I don't mean to be rude in any way, but I just don't want to go there at this time. But if you want my views on climate change, they're pretty well known.
Given floodplains stretch across different councils,
yes.
Can you foresee a prospect that out of an event like this, the state takes greater responsibility over local planning in relation to floodplains? Will that be part of any review?
Well, let me not prejudge the review, but look, I would say to you this, right? Having grown up in a community that is parts of which are prone to flooding, what I learned a long time ago is that local communities know best. Local communities know what water level X means almost down to the household. They've lived this, they know it, they absolutely understand how this unfolds and how it works. Catchment management authorities are appointed from local communities, they're part of local communities. There'll be a time for us to look at all of those issues. Let's wait and see what the review into this event, once it's over, and that'll be a good place to be because it'll be over and it's far from over now. And let's wait and see what they come back with. As I said, there's always learnings. Every event is unique. No two floods are the same, no two natural disasters are the same. But my view's always been a really common sense thing. Locals know best. They know their local community and would always look to reach in and to capture their wisdom so that we had the very best policy response. And we're seeing that unfold right now.
The Liberal candidate from Alt-Right made some comments about you over the weekend. He has since issued an apology. Do you accept that apology?
I've got absolutely nothing to say about that person or the comments he made. He's completely irrelevant to the work that I'm doing, keeping Victorians safe. His politics are for him.
Quick question for Tim, if people are finished with the program.
Yep.
You spoke
No worries,
about-
Rachel.
Sorry.
I'll take my leave.
You spoke about 96 metres in Echuca, but you're talking about 12 metres in Shepparton. Can you just explain to viewers what those measures are?
Yeah, really good question. So in Australia we have two height measurements. One is above sea level and also one which is called the Australian Height Datum. So where we see the Murray River, they use what is called AHD, which is the Australian Height Datum. And that's where you see those figures that are more significant. So at Rochester, for example, on the Campaspe River, we talked about heights that were around the height datum of 115, 116 metres, whereas further back down the Campaspe we talk about above sea level in that space. So that's the difference there. At Echuca today we're talking about a current height of 96 metres, and then as the second peak comes through on the Murray, 95 metres AHD in that space.
So when you're talking 12 metres in Shepparton, you're talking off the bottom of the river level, but when you're talking 96 metres in Echuca, that's AHD.
Correct.
Can we get an update on Flemington, Maribyrnong area? Is that now in that clean-up phase?
Yeah, so the Maribyrnong River warning was finalised yesterday by the Bureau of Meteorology on advice from Melbourne Water, and so they're very much now in the clean-up phase with local government and other support agencies now in there supporting those communities.
We've heard a lot about Seymour and Shepparton. There are a fair few communities in between there. What can you say about Nagambie, for example, and how they've been affected?
Yeah, look, there's a range of communities right through that Golden Valley district that are under flood at the moment, whether it's at the moderate flood level at the Seymour end, whether it's at the major flood level once you get to the likes of Nagambie and Murchison, all the way through to that peak that we saw this morning in and around Shepparton, Mooroopna and Kyalla. So because of the flood levels, because of the road closures, it's still too early to be able to get in and do detailed assessments. We do have our aerial intelligence gathering helicopter up today trying to assess, I guess, which areas are being impacted so that we can start planning where we'll need those ground crews to go in and do the more detailed assessments.
We got an overall assessment of how many properties have been flooded or inundated so far. I think Murray was on radio earlier this morning saying it could be up to 34,000.
Yeah, look, the number of properties that have actually been assessed at a ground level is around about that 500 mark at this point in time. As I've said, there's still significant road closures. We've got helicopters up that are, I guess, assessing from the air what the potential impacts are, and we've been talking about what the modelled impacts may be, but until we can actually get into those communities and do the much more detailed assessments at places like Rochester in the coming days, it'll then be Echuca, at Charlton, which has just peaked, they'll be into there as well. All of those communities will be surveyed from the air first up and then on the ground by our impact assessment teams.
How many crews do you have on the ground at the moment?
Look, we've got over 3,000 emergency service responders that are out in the field at the moment from all of our emergency services, but they're backed up by local councils, by Department of Transport and a range of other community groups that are supporting their communities at this time.
I think you said over the weekend, please tell me if I'm wrong, but that some people weren't leaving their homes when door knocked, even when they really should have been leaving. I asked before about the state of disaster, which would give you the power to tell them to leave. Is that something that would make the work of your volunteers easier? Is it something that you've canvassed with your colleagues behind you?
Look, I guess the key message around evacuations is to heed the warnings that we're issuing. People need to make the choice to leave early. If you're in Kerang today, we're talking about Kerang being isolated for the next 7 days. So now is the time to be making that decision to move. And I'll pass over to Andrew.
Just to reinforce the point Tim's making, we want people to comply with the warnings that we're actually putting out. Under a state of disaster, with that power to compel people, you cannot compel someone that's got a pecuniary interest in that property. So whether the owner, whether they're renting, so you just can't force them to leave. In sort of round numbers, if you want to try and physically move people, even if they're not resisting you, you're looking at 4 to 6 police. Do we really want to be taking police away from the critical work we're doing at the moment? So it's part of the considerations I have in relation to state of disaster, but certainly not front of mind in relation to that particular part of it.
What benefit would it bring us if you were to declare it today?
That's exactly what we're saying, that there would be no benefit whatsoever at the moment. So that's why there's no advice to my minister and then subsequently to the Premier to recommend a state of disaster.
Are you able to just clarify, because I think there's some confusion that declaring that state of disaster may open up some financial support, but that's not the case, is that right?
No, can I just be clear? Not declaring a state of disaster in Victoria in no way impacts, impedes any of the announcements the Premier has just made in relation to any funding arrangements whatsoever.
Very good. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.
As you guys leave, guys, make sure that we stop at the desk on the way out and check it out. Yeah.